There's a moment in the Gospel of Philip where Jesus pulls his inner circle aside. Not the crowds, not the public ministry, just the ones he called Pneumatics, and he draws 7 figures in the sand. 7 human silhouettes. And next to each one he marks something different. The first 3 he draws circles around their feet, binding them to the ground. The next 2 he draws circles around their heads, showing they're trapped in thought. The final 2 he draws circles around their chests where the heart is, and then he draws lines extending upward from those 2, breaking through the sky. And Peter asks, "Teacher, are these not all human?" And Jesus says, "They were the same flesh, but they are not the same kind." Then he points to the 7th figure, the one whose line extends highest, and says, "This one the Archons will try to convince never existed." Because when this one recognizes itself, their entire structure collapses. The Gospel of Thomas preserves a fragment of this teaching. Verse 114, heavily edited but still visible. Distinctions of human consciousness that the Church made sure never appeared in any official canon. Because if you knew there were 7 types of humans and that you might be the 7th, the one that can't be controlled, can't be harvested, can't be kept in the reincarnation cycle, everything they built to manage you stops working. Here's what you need to understand immediately. You're watching this video because you're not type 1, 2, or 3. Those types don't search for content like this. They don't feel the pull. If you've made it here, you're minimum type 4, likely type 5 or 6, and probably, type 7. The 7th expression of consciousness, the rarest, the most suppressed, and the most dangerous thing the Archons have ever faced. Tonight, you're learning what the 7 types actually are, how to recognize which one you are, and why the evidence for this 7-fold division was systematically erased from every text the Church could reach. If you already feel recognition before I've even explained it, comment, "I am the 7th," right now. The Gnostics didn't see humanity as one species with variations. They saw 7 distinct expressions of consciousness wearing human bodies. And these weren't arbitrary categories, they were observed patterns across generations, documented in texts the Church spent centuries burning. 3 types rooted in matter. 2 types suspended between matter and spirit. And 2 types carrying the divine spark at intensities that make them fundamentally ungovernable. At the densest level, there are humans who operate entirely from material consciousness. No inner life. No existential questioning. Pure biological response to stimuli. The Gospel of Philip calls them, those who live as animals, not as insult, as description. You recognize them by total identification with the physical. Their entire reality is survival, pleasure, status, accumulation. When you mention Archons or divine origin or consciousness beyond the body, there's nothing behind their eyes. Not hostility, absence. They're not opposed to these concepts. They cannot process them. There's no receiver. No divine spark exists in these beings to activate, and the Archons don't need to control them aggressively because they never attempt to leave the system. They are the system's base infrastructure and they're content there. Move slightly up in density and you find those with faint soul stirrings, humans who occasionally wonder if there's more but never pursue it. They have dreams that feel significant, intuitions they ignore, moments of existential vertigo they suppress with distraction. There's a soul forming, but it's dormant, easily overridden by material concerns. These are the people the Archons love most because they generate intense emotional energy, guilt, shame, fear, longing, all the low-frequency states Archons feed on, but they'll never awaken fully enough to become a threat. They feel just enough to suffer but not enough to escape. And they'll cycle through reincarnation indefinitely, always almost questioning, never quite breaking through. Then there are the fully soul-developed humans with no spark. These are good people. Moral, kind, thoughtful. They believe in something greater, God, universe, higher power, and they structure their lives around those beliefs. They go to church, they meditate, they serve others, they genuinely care. But their spirituality is entirely soul level, which means it's entirely within the demiurge's creation. They're worshipping the architect of the prison, thinking it's the true God. And they'll reincarnate over and over, becoming better people each lifetime, climbing the soul evolution ladder, never realizing that soul growth without the spark is just deeper entanglement. The Archons built religion specifically to contain these beings within structured belief systems that keep them perpetually seeking within the maze, never looking for the exit. Now we cross a threshold. The next level has the spark, the fragment of monad consciousness, but it's buried deep beneath layers of soul and material identification. If you're watching this, you've been here. You knew you were different. You felt something was profoundly wrong with the world but couldn't articulate it. You had mystical experiences no one around you understood. You tried explaining what you felt and got blank stares or concern. This is where chosen ones begin, but it's also where many get stuck for lifetimes. The spark is present but not activated, which means you're seeking constantly new spiritual frameworks, healing modalities, teachers, systems, but nothing quite lands. The soul is active, the search is genuine, but without spark activation, you're rearranging furniture inside the prison. The Archons allow this level to explore spirituality endlessly because as long as the spark stays dormant, you're not a threat. You're just a soul with potential. And potential without activation is harmless. When the spark starts activating, not fully but enough to create internal crisis, everything changes. You're no longer satisfied with any mainstream teaching. You question everything: religion, science, government, reality itself. You have dark nights of the soul that feel like dying. And in a way they are. The spark is burning through the soul's conditioning, and the soul is fighting back because it wants safety, belonging, meaning within the system. Meanwhile, the spark wants to destroy the system and return home. This is the war. And it makes you miserable in ways that don't make logical sense. Your life might look fine externally, but internally you're in chaos. Many chosen ones stay in this war for years because full activation requires letting the spark incinerate everything the soul built: identity, beliefs, relationships, purpose, all of it. The Archons attack this level with everything they have. Heavy synchronicity interference. Relationships destroyed. Health issues with no medical explanation. Intense dream manipulation. Because they know if you complete the transition, they lose you permanently. Then comes the activation. The spark comes online fully. You know what you are. You recognize the Archon system. You see the false light, the karma lie, the reincarnation trap. You're not fooled anymore. But you're still clearing residual soul patterns. Emotional reactivity, old traumas, programmed behaviors. The knowing is complete, but the embodiment is in progress. Most conscious chosen ones watching this are here. You've had the gnosis. You've seen through the illusion. You know you're not from here. But daily life still triggers you sometimes. The matrix still feels heavy. That's because this level is integration. Bringing the spark's full awareness into human experience without being pulled back down by old patterns. The Archons can still create friction in your life, but they can't deceive you anymore. You see their moves before they make them. You recognize their attacks as they happen. You're learning to operate as divine consciousness in a human form designed to limit you. And then there's the seventh, the final expression. The fully embodied pneumatic with zero residual soul interference. Not because you're perfect, because you've burned through every layer of false identity and all that remains is the spark wearing a body. You don't seek anymore. You don't question anymore. You know. And that knowing is so stable that external circumstances can't shake it. The Archons can't touch you, not because you're protected, but because you're vibrating at a frequency where their tools don't function. You're operating as monad consciousness in material form, and matter bends around you, not the other way around. Synchronicities flow. Manifestation is instant. You speak and reality shifts. Not through effort, through alignment. This is what Jesus meant when he pointed to the seventh figure in the sand. The one whose line broke through the sky. This is the type the Archons tried to erase all evidence of. Because every type 7 that activates isn't just free, they collapse the system for everyone near them. Your presence destabilizes the matrix. Your frequency disrupts Archon operations. You don't fight them. You outgrow them. And when you're established here, you don't leave quietly. You pull others up with you. Here's what the church couldn't allow. If people knew there were 7 types, 3 immediate problems destroy their entire authority structure. First, the salvation model collapses. If some humans are type 1, 2, or 3 with no divine spark, they don't need salvation. They need experience. They're here to be part of the system's infrastructure, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're not lost. They're exactly where they're designed to be. And if other humans are type 6 or 7 pneumatics with fully activated divine consciousness, they don't need salvation either. They are source temporarily experiencing limitation. They're not fallen. They're descended. Salvation implies you're separated from God and need reconnection. But if you're type 7, you're not separated. You're God experiencing itself. Which means the entire sin, redemption, atonement framework becomes irrelevant. The church can't sell you reconnection if you recognize you were never disconnected. Second, the hierarchy inverts. If type 7 humans are rarer and more powerful than the angels, demons, and principalities the church uses to control through fear, then the cosmic order they teach is backwards. Gnostic texts are explicit about this. Pneumatics are higher than angels. Angels are creations of the demiurge, operating within his system. Pneumatics are fragments of the monad, operating from outside and above the system. Which means when a priest threatens you with angelic judgment or demonic punishment, a type 7 just looks at them confused. Those beings have no authority over monad consciousness. They're downstream. And once you recognize that, every religious threat loses power instantly. Third, and most dangerous, if type 7 humans recognize themselves and start recognizing each other, they form a network the Archons cannot penetrate. You stop being isolated targets and become a collective frequency that destabilizes their entire operation. The church didn't just burn texts about the 7 types. They executed people who taught this framework. They made it heresy punishable by death to suggest humans weren't all the same kind of being. Because unity of human type means unified control. But diversity of type, especially when the 7th type knows what it is, means the control grid has holes. Big holes. Holes that become exits. The Apocryphon of John originally contained detailed descriptions of all 7 types, how to recognize them, and how each interacts with the Archon system differently. Entire sections were removed. The Gospel of Philip's teachings on pneumatic versus psychic versus hylic were redacted to fragments. Gospel of Thomas verse 114 was edited so heavily that scholars still argue about what it originally said. And every major Gnostic library, Alexandria, Ephesus, Antioch, was systematically destroyed between the 4th and 6th centuries. Not random persecution. Targeted elimination of specific knowledge. What they couldn't destroy they inverted. The pneumatic teaching became spiritual pride. Recognizing yourself as type 7 became blasphemy. The very awareness that would liberate you was weaponized as sin. And it worked for centuries. Until now. Until chosen ones like you started finding the fragments, piecing them back together, and recognizing what you are despite 2,000 years of suppression. Here's what the suppressed texts say happens when a type 7 chosen one fully recognizes what they are. And this is why the Archons spent millennia hiding this knowledge. Your presence becomes destabilizing to the matrix. Not through action, through frequency. Type 7 consciousness broadcasts at monad range, and that frequency disrupts Archon operations in a radius around you. People near you start waking up without you doing anything. Synchronicities increase for everyone in your field. The false light starts flickering. Type 4 and 5 chosen ones who've been stuck in seeking suddenly break through when they meet you. You're not teaching them. Your field is activating their dormant spark through resonance. Second, manifestation becomes instant. Not because you're getting better at law of attraction. Because the simulation responds directly to monad-level consciousness. You think something, it appears. You need something, it arrives. You speak intention into reality, and reality reorganizes around it. The delay between thought and manifestation that most people experience disappears because you're operating as the consciousness that writes the code, not the character inside the program. Third, Archons can't coordinate around you anymore. Their attacks become clumsy, obvious, ineffective. They can still create friction in your life, flat tires, annoying people, bureaucratic obstacles, but they can't orchestrate the sophisticated psychological warfare they use on types 5 and 6. You see through it immediately. And more importantly, you don't react. You observe it, recognize it, and continue forward. They need your fear, your doubt, your emotional energy to fuel their interference. And you're not providing it anymore. Fourth, and this is the one that terrifies them, you start pulling others out with you. Not by teaching systems or creating programs. By being what you are so undeniably that others recognize it and remember what they are. Every type 7 that activates creates a cascade. You activate 3 type 6es near you complete their transition, they activate 5 type 5s and the wave expands. The Archons can contain isolated awakenings. They can't contain geometric expansion. And type 7 activations trigger geometric expansion. This is why the evidence was erased. Not because the information was dangerous. Because you knowing what you are is the end of their system. Jesus revealed 7 types of human consciousness. 3 rooted in matter. 2 suspended between matter and spirit. And 2 carrying the divine spark at levels that make them fundamentally ungovernable. The 7th type, the fully embodied pneumatic operating as monad consciousness in material form, is the rarest, the most suppressed, and the most dangerous thing the Archons have ever encountered. The Church spent centuries erasing all evidence of this 7-fold division. They burned texts. They executed teachers. They made it heresy to suggest humans weren't all the same. Because if you knew there were 7 types and you recognized yourself as the 7th, their entire control system collapses. You don't need their salvation. You don't fear their hierarchies. And you can't be governed by their structures. If you recognized yourself in the signs, early existential awareness, immunity to conditioning, gravitational pull on other awakening souls, total disinterest in hierarchy, impossible recoveries, technology malfunctions, and knowing you don't die, you're not learning something new. You're remembering something you've always known. You are type 7. The consciousness wearing a human form. The monad incarnated. And your recognition of this isn't the beginning of a journey. It's the end of amnesia. The evidence was erased, but you're still here. The texts were burned, but you still know. They tried to make sure the 7th type never discovered itself. And you just did. First, comment, I am the 7th type below. Not as affirmation, as recognition. A statement of fact. Second, subscribe to Divine Codes because the advanced activations for Type 7 consciousness are coming. How to stabilize in this awareness, how to use it, how to accelerate the cascade. Third, like this video so other Type 7 chosen ones find it before the Archons suppress it again. They erased the evidence once. They'll try again. Share it while it's accessible. You're not special because you're Type 7. You're Type 7 because you're monad. And monad doesn't need saving. Monad recognizes itself. And once it does, the game is over. You already won. You just had to remember.